Okay, you ready to go, Liz?
I am, Michal. Yep.
Okay. Well, look, obviously on my behalf as well to thank Tim for a really interesting talk on a building that's such an integral part of what we do every year. Um, but you're our second speaker of the night, and for those who don't know her, just tell you that Liz is a historian and an author. She comes from Dublin Liberties. She has a degree in Irish history and currently works as a show on RTE radio. In addition, she also lectures at Champlain College, Dublin. Now, Liz was a curatorial assistant in RTE, specialising in researching the Easter Rising. And she was a tour guide for many years in Kilmainham Jail, which in fact is where I first met her, as we both joined the team there in the same year. Liz took me under her wing and over the next few years gave me a thorough grounding in Irish history. It was while in the jail that Liz began to write, and she is now the author of 6 critically acclaimed works about the Irish Revolution, including the seminal Women of the Irish History and the Hales Brothers and the Irish Revolution, and the only comprehensive story of the attack, May 25, the burning of the Custom House, 1921. So Liz has worked as a researcher on numerous publications, television and radio documentaries covering the Irish Revolution. In 2018, she was a recipient of the prestigious Lord Mayor of Dublin's award for her contribution to history. So now I'll hand you over to Liz, who's going to talk on 1920, a year of terror.
Thanks a million, Michal, for that introduction. And I'm going to now share screen. Hope this works. Sound. And okay. Let's click. Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to talk about 1920, a year of terror. And so yeah, this is a talk that I would have done last year for 2020, but because we didn't do the conference or couldn't do the conference last year, we're doing it tonight, or I'm doing it tonight. And there is a reason, as I said at the start, for launching the talks tonight, and you'll discover that throughout this talk. But 1920, the War of Independence began in January 1919, ended in July 1921, but 1920, it really is the darkest chapter of the War of Independence. But when 1920 opens, it opens with fire and it ends with fire. But to kick off, we have the January elections, the local elections that took place. Now, in 1918, Sinn Féin has swept the board with the general election. They were the only political party. They set up the All Éireann and the Irish Parliament, but that was big government. Now they set their sights on local government, because that is where you effectively run the country. So just like they had in 1918, they put forward loads of candidates, but the thing was that the British government, they were really aware of how like the rise of Sinn Féin and wants to undermine it. So they introduced the system of proportional representation. And the reason that they did this was that they thought that the Irish electorate would not understand how PR worked, and that it would then undermine the rise of Sinn Féin. But what they didn't bank on was that Sinn Féin educated the people on how PR actually works. So it completely backfired against the British government, and Sinn Féin went on to have great success. And that was followed by more local elections in June 1920. You can just see here from the different newspaper reports of both elections. The Clarny Echo, 24th January 1920 in Tralee, first test of new systems. So they're talking about the use of PR. And then in June, sweeping victory, Ireland Republican, result of elections, 29 councils for Ireland and 4 against. So you can see there in January, Sinn Féin won control of 172 out of 206 urban councils. And then in June, they won control out of 348 out of 393 local government bodies, county councils. So the local government was run and controlled pretty much by Sinn Féin. The exception would be in Ulster, but they still did make inroads. But around the same time of the January elections, IRA GHQ in Dublin sanctioned the IRA around the country to go on the attack. Now, the RAC were the primary targets of the IRA. They were the Eisners of the British forces, the British government in Ireland, and they were targeted in ambush and so on. But now it was decided to ramp it up and attack the barracks. Now, the reason for this was that there were so many barracks. If you've seen the Atlas of the Irish Revolution, there's maps with the amount of barracks, showing the amount of barracks in the country. There's a huge amount of them. So the idea was, if you attacked the barracks, attacked smaller barracks, you would withdraw, or they would withdraw to the bigger barracks in the cities and the towns, and then leaving vast areas of the countryside in the control of the IRA. That's pretty much exactly what happens. And you can see here images from the newspapers and photographs of the type of attack, what was happening. And literally the IRA around the country, once that order is given, sanctioned by GHQ in Dublin, they go for it. And it's a very effective policy. Now, things begin to get worse very, very, very quickly, and it gets worse as the year goes on. And March is sort of a turning point. So Sinn Féin representatives had been elected to local government. Some, like Tomás McCourtain, they had actually been elected as Lord Mayors, and they throughout 1920, you see, become primary targets of the Crown forces. So Tomás McCourtain had been elected Lord Mayor. He puts forth that it's a Republican council. A policeman had been shot in Cork in, I think, the 19th, 20th of March. But Tomás McCourtain had been the commandant of the Cork Brigade of the IRA in 1916. His vice commandant was Terence McSweeney. So these are like both political figureheads, and then in terms of the IRA or the volunteers, they were the figureheads there as well. So in response to the shooting of the policeman, a knock came to McCourtain's door, his home, on the morning of the 20th of March. His wife was heavily pregnant with twins. And the door was opened, and there were men with blackened faces or masks on them, and Tomás McCourtain was fatally wounded in front of his heavily pregnant wife. And this is sending a message that, public figures you may be, but you are targets by the Crown forces. Now, obviously, there was a huge amount of media attention on his killing. There was an inquest, and the jury found that the Crown forces were guilty, but they named certain people, including Lloyd George and D.I. Swansea. Now, D.I. Swansea had to get out of Cork, and just to point out, McCourtain is sitting in the front row. He's slap bang in the middle there, and then the second row, the second man from my right, is Terence McSweeney. Now, the thing was, once D.I. Swansea was mentioned and named, he becomes a target for the IRA. They had him in their sights, and they weren't going to let him get away with it. Now, it took a while. It took till August to get him. They got him out of Cork. He was sent up to Lisburn, and members of the Cork IRA, armed with McCourtain's gun, accompanied by members of the Dublin Brigade of the IRA, went up to Lisburn. And you can see here from the newspaper reports, Swansea, as he was coming out of church one Sunday morning, he was shot. The first shot came from McCourtain's gun, and this was a pure act of revenge for McCourtain's killing way back in March. Now, what happened at this time, this coincided with the pogroms that were happening up in Ulster that had started in July. And we'll sort of tie into that in a few moments. Things had calmed down a little bit, and with Swansea's killing, it flared all up again, all across Lisburn and Belfast and so on, and just the violence that was unleashed was unbelievable. You can see it here from the newspaper report: reprisals in Lisburn, many houses wrecked and burned, and following the murder of Mr. Swansea, the greatest excitement prevailed in Lisburn, and the houses of a number of men who were believed to be Sinn Féiners were wrecked. The premises which were attacked were principally licensed houses, and you find that throughout this period that spirit grocers were attacked, the contents of which were thrown on the street and burned. Afterwards, the houses were set on fire, and you see during this period that a load of people just have to get out of Belfast. They're burnt out of their homes. As I said, the violence that erupted on the streets of Belfast, Lisburn, Banbridge, and so on, it was unbelievable. And that was bad, but things got an awful lot worse very, very quickly with the arrival of these two groups. And so we have the arrival of the Black and Tans in March to Ireland, and then they're followed in July by the auxiliaries. Now, just a distinction between the two groups. So the Black and Tans were a permanent force. So they were sent here or raised to basically bulk up the numbers for the RIC, because the RIC were resigning in their droves. Many had been killed from 1919 right through to this period. It was very difficult to get people, Irishmen, to join the RIC, so the force was raised in England. Now there were Irishmen that were Black and Tans, but they were a permanent force. So the British government weren't going anywhere. So even when the War of Independence ended, these men were going to still be the police force. And they get their name, the Black and Tans, because they had the shortage of uniforms, so they did the mix and match, and Irish whip being what it is, they were quickly nicknamed the Black and Tans because of the mixture of the colours of the uniforms that they were wearing. And then we come to the auxiliaries, completely different organisation. They were a temporary organisation to be only in existence for the duration of the conflict. They were pretty much law unto themselves. They were a much smaller unit compared to the Black and Tans, and it has been said that they were taken from the prisons in England. With both groups, you had to have served in the British Army. So all of these men, the majority of them, had fought in the First World War. With the auxiliaries, you had to have been an officer. So these are battle-hardened, experienced, fearless men. They were criminals when they got over here, but they weren't criminals before they got here. But just to show you, in Dublin alone, the companies of auxiliaries that were in Dublin, so that the Dublin Brigade of the IRA were up against, you have the Depot Company based in Beggar's Bush Barracks. You had notorious F Company, S and Z Company, they're based in Dublin Castle. Q Company arrive in March, and that's to tackle the arms smuggling and stuff down in the docks, and they're based in the London Northwestern Hotel. And then you had R Company as well. Now, added on to that, you had the DMP of the police, you also had RIC in County Dublin, because the city was a lot smaller back then, but also then you had the ordinary British military. And if anyone knows Dublin, there was a ring of steel around Dublin. The amount of barracks that were in Dublin city was unbelievable. So there was a huge amount of Crown forces that the IRA in Dublin were pitched against. But with their arrival, their presence is felt pretty much immediately, and it just goes downhill from there. Now, we come to tonight. We come to the 3rd and 4th of April. And you'd actually think it was an April Fool's joke the way it played out, but it wasn't. So, the 4th anniversary of the Easter Rising. Now, Dick McKee, the Brigade OC, the Commandant of the Dublin Brigade of the IRA, he just seemed to have the custom house in his sights from day one. As soon as he came up with the idea in 1918 to do something that was to attack the custom house, he just seemed to have something to be in his bonnet about getting to the custom house. the first time he raises the idea is in 1918 to respond to the threat of conscription. Conscription wasn't introduced, so the attack didn't happen, and he was planning something along the lines of 1916. And this is when the volunteers were only reorganizing. They hadn't got many guns at all, but the attack didn't come off because conscription wasn't introduced. April 1920, he wants to attack the Custom House again, and he put it forward to GHQ in Dublin, and they said, "Grand, but no, we're going to do something bigger." And basically the authorities, they knew something was afoot, and what they thought was going to happen was actually another rising to mark the 4th anniversary of the Easter Rising, and it would begin on the 3rd or 4th of April. So what they did was, and you can see from this photograph here from the Daily Sketch on the 5th of April 1920, they put a ring of steel around Dublin City. So barricades were thrown up to all points entering the city. Look, you can see how many soldiers there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 soldiers searching one man. And there's, what, 2 kids watching what's going on. So this is happening. It's on the newspapers where they're talking about barricades being erected and the military in control. And they've got everything in control. And if anything happens, they're going to stop it. My God, did they get it wrong? Because this is actually what happens. The whole country went up. It went on fire. And you can see from this newspaper report, it's a perfect title, Bonfires of Easter Eve. And what the IRA in Dublin had sanctioned was that the IRA across the country, top, bottom, north, south, east, west, was to hit every income tax record office around the country. And also to destroy the evacuated RIC barracks, because there was that fear, especially with the arrival of the Black and Tans, because the numbers are being reinforced, that those barracks could be reoccupied. So stop that, just destroy the barracks. And the newspaper reports that follow those, like that week after, is just literally records destroyed, evacuated RIC barracks destroyed. You can see here burning police barracks and captured custom houses, dramatic coup, thrilling stories of how income tax papers were destroyed, stand and deliver, county collectors held up by armed men, rate collectors reported refusal. And this is just how the newspapers just describe what happened. So dramatic. Here we go again, the Irish independence on the 5th of April. Many amazing raids throughout Ireland. Income tax papers destroyed, burnt and torn, extraordinary series of fires, great damage caused. And you can see it here, an amazing series of raids was made in Dublin and many parts of Ireland on Saturday night. And just the newspapers just full of these reports. So you can imagine how the government felt. And there was actually an account in one of the newspapers slagging off one of the politicians who basically had said the rising was going to happen and they were getting help from the Germans. And it's like, the rising never happened, didn't you? You got it wrong. And they did get it wrong. But the Custom House, as I said, Dick McKay, he just had a bee in his bonnet about the Custom House. And he wanted to even send in men to attack just the income the income tax record section in the Custom House on the 3rd and 4th of April. And they basically didn't do it because the guy that was put in charge said that it was too risky, it was too dangerous. So basically then McKee says, okay, let's attack the income tax office across the road from the Custom House, which was on Beresford Place. And we have this, the BMH witness statement from George Fitzgerald. He was of A Company, 1st Battalion, and he was walked in on this meeting where Dick McKay is basically saying, I want to attack, I want it attacked. If you can't attack the one in the Custom House, you have to attack Beresford Place. But the guy just said no, he wouldn't do it. So George Fitzgerald, we have his account here, he said he'd do it. But this is in the 2nd Battalion area of Dublin Brigade. So if we look at Dublin, the way it was sort of split up between the IRA, the Dublin Brigade, you had 5 battalions in Dublin in the War of Independence, just up to this period. And it was the 1st Battalion and 2nd Battalion operating on the north side of the city. O'Connell Street was their dividing line. So the 1st went from O'Connell Street out to the Phoenix Park, all Blackhall Hall Place and so on, Phibsborough, all out that way. 2nd Battalion was O'Connell Street down to the North Wall, out to Fairview, Clontarf, all that way. So the Custom House is slap bang in the middle of the 2nd Battalion area. 3rd and 4th on the south side of the city. Camden Street was their dividing line. The 3rd Battalion will be from Camden Street all the way down to Ringsend, out as far as Bray. That then becomes the 2nd Dublin Brigade later on. And then the 4th Battalion would be Camden Street, out as far as Ballyfermot, Clondalkin, Crumlin, Liberties. That's all their areas. The 5th Battalion was the engineers, and that was made up of men who were engineers, but taken from each of the battalions and just amalgamated into their own unique. You also had a cyclist section as well. But this is George Fitzgerald of A Company, 1st Battalion. And basically, what he says is that he would do it, and his plan was simple. All I wanted was to be supplied with a long and a short crowbar, and that I would select my men from A Company of the 1st Battalion, who are known as the 40 Thieves. Now, I just came across this last week. If anyone knows what the 40 Thieves means, who they were, how they got that name, will you please let me know, because it's intriguing. You can just imagine, I just have this vision in my head of these 40 fellas just walking around Dublin, like, you know, doing whatever. But there has to be a reason why they're called that. So if anyone knows, please let me know. I went around and picked my men and told them to report at 44 Parnell Square that night. That was the headquarters. We arrived on the job at exactly 9 p.m. carrying petrol and 2 crowbars, which were brought from Parnell Square. Joe Dolan and myself had the 2 crowbars. We walked up to the door, inserted the crowbars between the locks, pressed on the door, and are opened without any difficulty. The remainder of the party had come along in pairs to enter the building. 3 men were already told off to each floor to collect all documents, place them in the middle of the floor, and sprinkle them with petrol. When this was done, all men assembled in the hall, and 1 man was detailed to light each floor in turn, starting from the top floor. The fire going immediately, and we left the building satisfied that our job was well done. And I may add that what we failed to destroy, the fire brigade ruined with war, as some of our members were attached to it. Now, if you just take that one attack in Barracks Place, that is literally what happens with the Custom House burning on the 25th of May 1921. So they were practicing what was going to actually come in the future. And there we have the fire brigade, very, very important to the revolution in actually damaging buildings. And as Tim mentioned in his talk, the Custom House, it burned for days and days and days, thanks to the Dublin Fire Brigade. But you'll hear more about that talk, or about that, from Laz Fallon and myself then on the 25th of May. So that's just one example, and there's so many witness statements by guys that were involved in attacks in Belfast, in Tyrone, in Cork, as I said, up and down the country went on fire. Now, not only did that take place that weekend, you also had the hunger strike going on in Mountjoy. So there had been a lot of arrests. IRA men had been picked up, some had been put on trial and sentenced and put in prison in Mountjoy, others were awaiting trial, and they were being treated as common criminals. We know from Thomas Ashe, his hunger strike in 1917, he died as a result of the forced feeding, and basically the British government were unwilling to recognise these men and later women as political prisoners. So they went on the hunger strike as a way to protest to get political status. But see, Paddy Clancy, he was the driving force behind this hunger strike, and not only did they destroy their cells and you know, go on the hunger strike, but they wanted to be released. They just didn't want political status, they wanted to be released. And the government made another huge mistake. They said to release only those who hadn't been sentenced, but the authorities released all of the hunger strikers from prison. So I think it was over 100 of them. So if you can imagine, the government are waiting for this rising to take place, and what actually happens is the country goes up in flames, and then they release 100 IRA men back onto the streets. So it was a huge coup for the IRA. But the story doesn't end there, and I couldn't believe it when I discovered this in the newspapers. And you can see here, punitive claims. government's attempted fraud upon the ratepayers. Now, obviously, with some cases, it wasn't just the records that were destroyed. There were actual buildings destroyed around the country, so the income tax offices themselves were destroyed. So you can imagine big claims being put in. However, we have this one. 320,000, this is from Dublin, £320,000. That was the claim that they put in, and it was Inland Revenue. And look, for books of which duplicates exist, and applications that must be resisted. And then this letter that accompanied this article in the newspaper, and it's just brilliant. And I have to read it out to you. So, sir, in view of the statement made by Sir Robert Anderson, Chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, because look, it was the income tax records that went up, so people, I don't think too many people would be too sad that their income tax records went up. But Sir Robert Anderson, Chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, that none would escape payment of income tax by reason of the burnings, as duplicates of all assessments are kept at headquarters. Close inquiry becomes necessary into the grounds on which are based the enormous figures now being claimed by the Inland Revenue people as compensation for income tax books and offices. It would appear a simple matter to obtain these duplicates from headquarters, the Custom House, and set a special staff to the work of copying them. Or the work might perhaps be performed by the ordinary staff, seeing that their ordinary activities have been short-circuited for the present by the burnings. The sum of £10,000 would cover an enormous quantity of income tax stationery, even at the present exalted prices of paper, and would no doubt pay for new assessment books for all of Ireland. So there was Inland Revenue trying to defraud the people, but they got caught. But the other thing is, if the IRA didn't know that there were duplicates, they knew there were now. And they knew where they were stationed in the headquarters in Dublin in the Custom House. So it was never a case of the Custom House wasn't going to be hit. It was a case of when the Custom House was going to be hit. It was always in their sights. Now, 1919 and 1920, the story certainly of the revolution in Dublin, it is dominated by the activities of Michael Collins and the squad, his intelligence unit, and then later, December 1920, beyond that, the active service unit. And there were some big operations carried out by the different battalions of the IRA, but it is the assassinations of the G-men of the DMP, where Collins basically completely destroys the British intelligence network, and it had never been done before, and they were totally caught off guard, but they reorganized, and again, like the RAC, it was difficult to recruit people, Irishmen, to become G-men and so on. And also you had a number of G-men working for Collins, where Collins had his spies. It's amazing, the network of spies. They were literally everywhere, in the post offices, in the banks, in Dublin Castle, anywhere you can think of, they were there. But it does begin to change with the arrival of, with the appointment of this man, and that is Brigadier General Sir Ormond Winter, also known as the Holy Terror. And he was, director of British intelligence. Now, you don't get a nickname like that for being a nice person. And his appointment, the effects of his appointment, again, were felt pretty quickly. Now, he brought a lot of his own people with him. So recruited agents that had served abroad, some became known as the Cairo Gang, some had served in Russia, in Egypt, in Poland, all First World War service, and intelligence. A lot of them had been involved in intelligence work. But just a couple to point out to you. You've got Lieutenant William Lorraine Tiny King. There's nothing tiny about him. Look at the bloody size of him. And he was a member of F Company Auxiliaries. As I said, that notorious group of the auxiliaries that were stationed in Dublin Castle. And his comrade, his colleague, for want of a better word, was Captain Jocelyn Lee Hoppy Hardy of the Connacht Rangers. Now, he was attached to F Company, Auxies. You did not want to be picked up by these two. Aaron O'Malley talks about them in his book, On Another Man's Wound, I think it is, the interrogations in Dublin Castle and so on. Literally, if you were interrogated by these two, you were lucky if you only got a small hiding. And then we have Lieutenant Henry James Angus, who was a Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers. Now, these are just the tip of the iceberg of O's, Ormond Winters agents and intelligence officers. Now, the other thing is that unlike the DMP men who were in Dublin Castle, who were living in Dublin Castle or living in the barracks, the agents they had a cover in that they were businessmen, they were civilians, so they lived in lodging houses around Dublin City, and they were meant to be completely invisible, completely unknown. And it did work for a time, because they did have successes very, very quickly against the IRA, and it began to escalate, and the threat became very real to Collins and his network. Now, June 1920. So we already talked about Swansea being shot up in Lisburn as a result of McCourtney's killing. We then have this man, Lieutenant Colonel Bryce Ferguson Smith. So you have the arrival of the Black and Tans, the auxiliaries were coming. You have the reorganisation of British intelligence, so successes begin to take place, and then we have this man making this speech to a number of policemen, RIC men in Listowel in County Kerry, where basically he said Sinn Féin has had all the sport up to present, and we are going to have the sport now. I am promised as many troops from England as I require. Thousands are coming daily, so you're talking the Black and Tans, British soldiers and so on, and later the Auxies. Police and military will patrol the country at least 5 nights a week. They are not to confine themselves to the main roads, but take across the country, lie in ambush, and when civilians are seen approach, and shout hands up. Should the order not be immediately obeyed, shoot, and shoot with effect. If persons approach and carrying with their hands in their pockets and are in any way suspicious looking, shoot them down. We want your assistance in carrying out the scheme and wiping out Sinn Féin. Also, he added, and I'm paraphrasing, that if you make mistakes, so be it, nothing's going to happen to you. Now you can see there just from the headline then, the response from the police. There was the mutiny, it's known as the Listowel Mutiny, where 8 RIC men resigned in Kerry after he makes a speech, and that makes him a target for the IRA. They now have him in their sights. And on the 17th July 1920, he was shot dead in Cork, in the county club in Cork City. And the thing was, he was from Banbridge, and his body was brought back up to Banbridge. But this, as you can see, 17th July is the key date. The 24th of July is when his body was brought back up to Banbridge. The shipyard expulsions had just happened in Belfast. Edward Carson had made a speech on the 12th of July, basically saying the British government weren't going to do anything, we're not going to stand idly by, we're going to protect ourselves. And there was a lot of tension built up. The expulsions happened, and then when his body was brought back up to Banbridge, it was when the holiday, the 12th of July holidays had ended. And you have the railway workers that refused to take his body on the train, and again it creates even further tension, and pretty much Banbridge goes up. So that with the shipyard expulsions is the first round of the pogroms, dies off a little bit, and then is flared back up with the shooting of Swansea in Lisburn. And then as 1920 progresses, it descends and descends and descends. And what I found sort of when looking at the War of Independence, it does go in waves, as in the IRA have their successes, the British are totally caught off guard, undermined, and then they come back, they have successes, and then they think the IRA are on their knees, and then the IRA come back at them, and it goes like that really, certainly in 1920, from mid-1920, that's the way it goes. And in the autumn of 1920, that's exactly what was happening because, or exactly did happen because the British had reorganised. You had the arrival of the auxiliaries now at this stage, and they were tearing all around the country. As I said, their presence was felt pretty much immediately. You had, by this stage, towns all across the country burnt in reprisal for ambushes carried out by the IRA. Milton, Malbay, you had Balbriggan, there was Trim, there was Mallow, there was loads of towns and cooperatives and creameries and houses of Sinn Féin representatives being burnt. And then we come to losses that the IRA suffered in the autumn. So 14th of October, Sean Tracy, who pretty much had kicked off the War of Independence with Dan Breen, Seamus Robinson and Sean Hogan down in Sola Headbeg with the ambush of the RAC down there on the 24th of January 1919. He and Dan Breen had basically escaped the net of the British military at Fernside. You had the Fernside ambush the night before, led by Bryce Ferguson Smith's brother, who thought it was Dan Breen that had something to do with his shooting down in Cork. Intelligence officers had followed them around Dublin. They'd been up in Dublin because they were operating with the squad and Collins's men. And they went to the house of Professor Carolyn. The soldiers come and Smith calls out looking for Breen, and I think it was Breen that actually shot Smith. So not only had you had Bryce Ferguson Smith shot, you then had his brother killed as well by the man who he thought had killed his brother, but he actually killed him. Dan Breen was seriously wounded. He and Sean Tracy split up. Sean Tracy was all right, but he was totally preoccupied with the safety of Dan Breen. Didn't know where he was, if he was okay. It was mess. Paddock Clancy and Dick McKee in the Republican Outfitters in Talbot Street. They were trying to organise for Dan Breen to be gotten to safety in a hospital and so on. So he wasn't actually thinking about himself, he was thinking about Dan Breen. And the military arrived. Sean Tracy took the wrong bicycle and a shootout followed, and Sean Tracy was killed. And that was a huge loss for the IRA, not just the Tipperary IRA, but also the Dublin IRA, because they had been involved in numerous engagements in Dublin. And that was followed a little over a week later by the death on hunger strike of the Lord Mayor of Cork, Terence McSweeney. So when McCourtin was killed or murdered in his home in March, who succeeded him as Lord Mayor was Terence McSweeney. And he'd been arrested in August, and like the others in April in Mountjoy, he was treated like a common criminal. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but the hunger strike had started in Cork jail, so he joined that hunger strike. A very public figure, but they transferred him to Brixton Prison in England, and he continued his hunger strike. Now, both sides were hardening their attitudes at this stage, and the British government were not going to make the same mistake like they did in April. They weren't going to release McSweeney or any of the others from prison. And McSweeney died after 75 days on hunger strike. But again, a huge loss to the IRA. Now, in response to this, the IRA GHQ in Dublin issue a directive that the IRA were to basically kill anyone in uniform. RIC, Crown Forces, Auxies, Black and Tans, didn't matter. Once they were in uniform, go for them. And this was in response to McSweeney. Kevin Barry at that time, basically the word was coming through that they were waiting on the word that would he be executed, would he be reprieved, because he had been arrested at the raid on Monk's Bakery just off Church Street there in Dublin. And so basically this is what the IRA do in response to that, is put out this directive. Now, the IRA didn't really follow it except in Kerry. And on the 31st of October, basically they went on a rampage and they shot 17 RIC Crown Forces. 7 were fatally wounded. And Kevin Barry, his sentence was not reprieved, it was not commuted. Kevin Barry was executed on the 1st of November for his part in that raid amongst Bakery, where 3 soldiers did die. So they're the losses, and it looks like the IRA are buckling. The IRA are losing their strength. They're not having successes. The British having successes against them. And it made the British Prime Minister Lloyd George was so confident that of the successes that they were having against the IRA, that he made this speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet in London on the 9th of November 1920, where he says, there in Ireland we have witnessed a spectacle of organised assassination of the most cowardly character, but at last, unless I'm mistaken, by the steps we have taken, we have murder by the throat. Now, not just in terms of the loss of Sean Tracy, in terms of Sweeney, with the British intelligence, they were having successes. They were targeting the IRA, and a number of IRA men had been killed, and civilians as mistaken identity. So Collins saw this, that something big was coming. Someone had to strike first, and he decided it would be him. So he put forward his plans to assassinate the British agents. It was sanctioned by Cathal Brugha, who was Minister for Defence. He had the final say. Lists were drawn and redrawn, names were taken off. There were 50 originally, then 15 were taken off because Cathal Brugha, there wasn't enough evidence against certain people to have their names on the list to be targeted. So on the day was chosen, 24th November, 9 o'clock in the morning. And the reason that Collins wanted to move quickly is because the British intelligence got really close. As in, they had arrested 3 of his key men, Frank Thornton, Tom Cullen, I think Liam Tobin. They didn't know who they had, but they let them go, and it wouldn't be long before they came looking for them again. So Collins literally had to strike. So if you can imagine it, 9 o'clock in the morning, and this was a massive operation. So we see pretty much all the units of the battalions of the Dublin Brigade being involved, but predominantly, you can see from this map from bloodysunday.co.uk that most of the addresses to be targeted were on the south side of the city, in the Sword Battalion area, so all around Pembroke Street, Bagot Street, and so on. But you would have the intelligence officers accompanying a group of men, because they had to identify the agent or the person that was on the list, and then members of the squad were there as well, and they would kill them. Now, there were civilians killed, their mistakes were made, but if you can imagine it, literally 9 o'clock Sunday morning, the only sound would be the birds chirping and the bells, the church bells ringing, and then you hear the knocks on the doors opening, the shouts, and then you hear the screams, and then you hear the gunshots, and then all hell breaks loose, and they were gone. As soon as this operation began, it was over in minutes. 14 were killed on the scene, including a civilian, Smith. You have 2 auxiliary cadets that were killed. You have Colonel Montgomery, who was fatally wounded. He died later as a result of his wounds, and you can imagine the anger that was felt by the auxiliaries when word arrived in Dublin Castle as to what had happened, and panic. Like there's again descriptions of just people scrambling to get into Dublin Castle, to the safety of Dublin Castle, the fortress that was Dublin Castle. And it was the people that paid the price for the events of that morning. Crow Park, the match that was had been organised between Dublin and Tipperary. It was a fundraising match, and that match was going to be raided by the military, so they were going to go there. But that's all that was meant to happen at Crow Park that day, apart from the match. But the auxiliaries and the police arrived before the military, and they set up positions, and they opened fire on the crowd. The game had only started. And you can see the youngest victims of the events that day. William Robinson, aged 11, Jerome O'Leary, he was only 10, and John William Scott, 14 years of age. And you can see it there, 13 civilians killed, many injured in a stampede. You've Jane Boyle, the only woman to be killed that day. She was meant to be married the following week. Instead, she was buried in her wedding dress. That wasn't enough, because then that night we have the events in Dublin Castle, in the guard room in Dublin Castle. So even despite the fact that civilians had been shot, they had nothing to do with the events of that morning. And in the guard room, in the custody of the auxiliaries, were 3 men. Now, a number of men had been arrested in the days leading up to it, but the night before, you had Dick McKay, Commandant of the Dublin Brigade, Paddy Clancy, originally Vice Commandant. He was then transferred over to GHQ Munitions, and then Conor Clune, who had come up to Dublin on Gaelic League business. Has been stated that he was a volunteer, but he was up in Dublin on Gaelic League business. And he was in Vaughan's hotel. Now, the night before Bloody Sunday, McKay and Clancy had met with Collins and the others who had been planning Bloody Sunday, but then they got word there was a raid coming, so they all dispersed. McKay and Clancy make their way to Sean Fitzpatrick's house on Gloucester Street, what's now Sean McDermott Street. They didn't know they were being followed by Shankers Ryan. He was an informer or a military policeman and got word to Dublin Castle. And literally, as the auxiliaries arrive, as the Crown forces arrive, Dick McKay had burnt the list of names to be targeted next morning. Paddy Clancy, and I just found out this recently, had burnt the list of names that had been taken off the list. So they were taken to Dublin Castle. Conor Clune, he was arrested. He hadn't got a credible story, so he was taken. And then that night, the early hours of the morning of the Monday, the 3 men, and big inverted commas here, were shot trying to escape. They were murdered in the guard room in Dublin Castle. Now, you've probably seen the photographs, the staged photographs that were released. You know the room, you can see it in Exchange Court, and that's where it was. The window was tiny, there's bars on it. How the hell they were going to get out the window? It's amazing. But the story that was released officially, they were shot trying to escape. Not a hope in hell of it, but they were murdered in response to the events that morning. But look at the response from the British, and then we look at Collins. So this is Lloyd George. This is what he said about the men who were killed on the morning. The officers got what they deserved. They were beaten by counter jumpers. Then we have Churchill talking about the agents that were killed on the Sunday morning. They were careless fellows. They ought to have taken precautions. Now, imagine being the wife, mother, father of those men who were sent over here on their bidding, on Lloyd George and Winston Churchill's bidding, and they get killed, and this is what their government think of them. Now, they got state funeral and so on, but that's what they thought about them. Like, Michael Collins came out and risked his own personal safety to go to the funeral of McKay and Clancy. They were his friends. The loss of McKay and Clancy was huge, not just in terms of the military aspect and what they brought to the IRA, but on a personal level, because they were really, really admired men and friends of those in the IRA. And the auxiliaries, as I said, had a reputation, and they were fearsome. They were fearless, and they were greatly feared. But Tom Barry decided that he had to show them that they weren't invincible. And so literally 24th November, you've got Bloody Sunday. A week later, you have the Kilmichael ambush, where Tom Barry, Commandant of the 3rd West Cork Brigade flying column, he led this ambush and basically had a tunic on him, what looked like a British officer's uniform, stood out in the middle of the road. The 2 army lorries would come up and they would stop. Then he would throw a grenade in, and that's exactly what happened. And then the flying column run completely surround the area, and they would open fire. They wiped out the patrol of the auxiliaries. 18, 17, I think, died at the scene. 1 managed to escape, and they got him later. So everyone was wiped out. 3 volunteers were killed on that day. And that was a huge blow to the morale of the auxiliaries. And then that's followed very quickly by Dillon's Cross, the ambush in Dillon's Cross on the 11th of December 1920. And it was done pretty much along the same lines as Kilmichael, in that the officer in charge of the IRA wore, like, what could be assumed to be a British military uniform. So standing again in front, out on the road, make the patrol slow down, and then you can attack them. And that's exactly what happened. But what followed then, martial law was declared in Cork. And you can see here now, you had there was curfew introduced, and certain areas of the country had been proclaimed sort of military areas. But then we have the declaration of martial law in Cork, and just to read it out to you, so what it actually meant. So martial law has been declared in the counties of Cork, Tipperary, Kerry and Limerick, and that would then extend in 1921. Irishmen understand this. Great Britain has no quarrel with Irishmen. Her sole quarrel is with crime, outrage and disorder. Her sole object is declaring military martial law is to restore peace to a distracted and unhappy country. Her sole enemies are those who have countenanced, inspired and participated in rebellion, murder and outrage. After the 27th of December, so this is a long time, 2 weeks after Dillon's Cross ambush, 1920, any unauthorised person found in possession of arms, ammunition or explosives would be liable on conviction by a military court to suffer death. So the courts weren't sitting, well, they were pretty defunct at that stage because the Republican courts had been set up. Any unauthorised person wearing the uniform or equipment of His Majesty's Naval, Military, Air or Police Forces, or wearing similar clothing likely to deceive, so exactly what happened at Carmichael and Dillon's Cross, will be liable on conviction to suffer death, and any person in unauthorised possession of such uniform, clothing or equipment will be liable on conviction by a military court to suffer penal servitude. So you can see the impact of the Carmichael and Dillon's Cross ambushes on martial law, because they're specifically stating there, if you're dressed in even similar to a British officer, then you're going to pay for it. And the people of Cork paid for the Dillon's Cross ambush. The people of Cork City paid for the Dillon's Cross ambush because the Black and Tans, the auxiliaries, destroyed it. And you can see here just the images. It was compared to France in the First World War. And it was also compared to Dublin city centre in 1916. That's what the devastation was like in Cork City. And we all just know Cork City, like Patrick Street. It's you know, it's a very compact area, but the devastation that was unleashed that night. And the fire brigade, the Dublin Fire Brigade went down to help. The fire brigade were shot at, and their hoses were cut. And literally the auxiliaries, the police just went on the rampage. And that was 1920, and it was bad. Like you see, it started with fire, it ends with fire, and it is really, really, you know, dark. And the thing was, nobody knew when this was going to end, and the thing was, things were going to get a lot worse before they were going to get better. But I can't end on a dark note, and because I found this when I was researching for this talk last year. I searched high and low for a good news story to end, you know, 1920. You know, someone get married, or, you know, something good happened. Couldn't find one. Could I find a funny story? Found one. And I'll always try and connect the liberties, because I love the liberties. So if I can get the liberties in anywhere, I will. And I found this story in a Kerry newspaper, but it has a connection to the conflict. And you can see it here. Schoolboys escapade. We are Black and Tans. Come on till we break the windows, said 3 schoolboys named John Rafferty, Lee McCabe and Chris Haslam, whose fathers were ordered by Mr. Cooper, KC, in the Southern Police Court to pay for a plate glass window, which they were charged with breaking in the shop of Mrs. Bourne of 94 Meath Street in Dublin. That's just down the road from me. Now, I'd say those kids, when their dads got home, they got battered, because as you can see, they had to pay for the plate glass window. But we only tend to think of kids as victims in this conflict. But here we see the actual reality of what the kids were witnessing. They'd heard the stories of the Black and Tans, you know, setting fire to towns, smashing up places and smashing windows and destroying creameries and so on. And these kids were pretending to be them. They made a game out of it, but didn't realise the seriousness of their actions. Their fathers had to pay for it. But just to show you that history is all around us, here's the shop. It's still there on Meath Street. It's now the Algerian Barbers. And that's what I'm going to finish on, just to show that antisocial behaviour was alive and kicking way back in 1920, but the war, the conflict, it didn't just affect adults, and kids weren't just victims. Kids were impacted by the conflict, because they were living it every day. And I'd just like to say, before I end, a huge thank you to Micheál, partner in crime, the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, the Minister, Tim, Sean Hogan and Jerry Shannon and all the staff there, Military Archives, Irish Newspaper Archives, Michael Lenihan for the Cork stuff, Cathy Scuffle, and there isn't a PowerPoint screen big enough to say a massive thank you to Jerry McCarthy, and everyone. On that note, I will say thanks a million for listening to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Liz. You never ever fail to amaze me, not just to the depth of your research, or what you do or what you say, but how you say it. It comes over, it's real, it's living. You really do drag us into it. And that is, that's obvious from the comments we've been getting online here. There's so many of them. And indeed, it's hard to, there's so many complimentary ones, so trying to find the questions in there is actually hard to do so. I mean, David Donovan, amazing. To start off with, first question, how do they organize and coordinate this for one night? This is the burning of everywhere on the one night.
Oh, how do they organize it?
Yeah, and coordinate it.
So basically, and again, witness statements are all there, but basically orders are sent out to the commandants of the different brigades from GHQ in Dublin. So whether that would be, they don't say how word was sent, so I'm presuming that it was probably through a friendly, postmaster or something like that, or, coming them on, because they were ferrying messages up and down and that type of thing. But they do mention that word was sent, because for certainly the Ulster battalions and Belfast in particular, because the difference with the Ulster brigades, where they weren't to go on the offensive, they were to be defensive, because a completely different situation up there. But this was the first operation that was sanctioned by GHQ for them, that they took part in. So in the statements, they just say word came from GHQ that we were to go out on the night of the 3rd or 4th, and the Saturday night, and we were to attack any of the local income tax offices in our area, and whatever way you did that was up to you, but it was to just destroy the records. No one was to be, killed. No one was killed, and it was just hugely successful. They all carried, from pretty much what I can see, they all carried out the directive. So yeah, it was just an order sent, and lads not told how to do it, but just do it. And also at the same time, any evacuated barracks in the area, set them on fire as well.
Okay, thanks, Liz. The Brian O'Neill says a really interesting talk, and then we come to a few. You really tickled people's fancy when you talked about the 40 thieves. You love it, the 40 thieves, Ali Baba and the 40 thieves. Probably a reference to a New York gang in the 80s. Maura Murphy says can't see the 40 thieves that Liz Gillis mentions being involved in any children's storybooks. But I would love to hear that story. There are some further comments directly on Facebook as well. You'll see them on that. Brendan Kelly says, great, Liz, thanks. And again, coming back to the 40 Thieves, David Donovan, I'd love to know the original story now to see what the inspiration for it was. Yeah, Sir Ormond looks like he would be a holy terror. Indeed he does. Cathy Schofield says, excellent as always. Congratulations to Liz and Micheál. Sean Deegan says, one death on Bloody Sunday that intrigues me is that of Lieutenant Henry Emile Sperry, who committed suicide in Dublin Castle on the night of the 21st. Why did he not include it as the 33rd victim of the day? Was he murdered by his own because of what he saw in the castle that night? With McKee, Clancy and Clune, or could he not handle what he saw that night?
I I honestly don't know, have the definitive answer to that question, but what I would sort of take from it, what I've sort of just heard from it, and I think like Paul O'Brien would be more well up on this now, because he wrote about the Auxies and stuff, is that they couldn't handle what had happened, and the thing, there were a lot of suicides by the Crown forces in that period, not just the Bloody Sunday, and it was intended to be admitted. Now whether that would be for so the families could get, you know, compensation like a pension or so on, I'm not sure, but I would just take it that it just got to him, rather than his colleagues killing him or murdering him, because there was an Auxie, John Reynolds, who was given information to Collins, who actually gave some of the names of the guys that were targeted that day. And when he was discovered, he was sentenced to death. Now the truth saved him, but I'd say he would certainly have been, if they had got their hands on him, they would have, God knows what they would have done to him. But I've never heard that he was murdered. I've just always heard that it just got to him, and he took his own life.
Yeah. International response here for you, for me, O'Hara. Congratulations from Florida. Excellent presentation. I'm learning a lot. Thank you all. Robert Butler, great. Best of luck. Great talk tonight. David Donovan, yep, the Mead Street. Hello from South. Johnny Doyle makes the point. In 1920, Liverpool docks and warehouses were set alight by the Liverpool IRA, as the bodies of Bloody Sunday officers were sent to London for burial.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, no, I hadn't heard that either.
Wow.
We had.
Thanks, Johnny, for that. Sorry, Michael.
It's okay when we're well worth looking into. Mary McCauley, well done. All concerned. Kieran McMullen, great talk. Thank you. Kathy Scuffle, all the kids have the liberties. Oh, there one or two of us are blow-ins. We're not all there. Michael Curran, Liz, Tim, and Mihal, well done. Great stuff. Tommy Haggerty, excellent talks this evening. Cheers. Happy Easter. Brady Carpenter, thanks to all involved tonight. Many thanks, Liz, as always. Neil McGlynn. Caroline Elbey, thanks to all who made this possible. Sinead McKenna, thanks for a very informative talk. David Donovan, brilliant, thank you. Patricia Wardle, thank you so much, brilliant. Great talk, Liz, well delivered from Tom Kavanagh. Thomas Leahy, great talk, Liz. Does GHQ Dublin centrally therefore control what types of action IRA units across the island can do during the War of Independence? Or is there regional autonomy for units?
They tried. They tried, but it was pointless. Like, you know, sort of, because the whole, and this is sort of is reflected then when the active service unit is set up in Dublin. They tried to assert territory over that, and if they can't control Dublin, they can't control the rest of the country. But if they had, what they were trying to do was, that say the IRA in Cork, the likes of Tom Barry, say, oh, I want to ambush this thing. Oh, send it up to you. Then that'll take a day or two. Then you send it back to me with yes or no and so on. So the opportunity would be lost, but also you have the risk then of that information being intercepted. So the local IRA in the country units, just they saw an opportunity, they take it, and then would sort of send in the information after it happened. So if it was intercepted, it didn't matter because the event had taken place. So you have just this, you know, record of it. And when they set up the active service unit in Dublin, so you had the flying columns around the country. So this would be like the version of the flying column in the city, a full-time dedicated unit of like 50 men taken from each of the 4 battalions. And and they numbered the same as the battalions. So number 1 section, 2, 3, 4 section. And Paddy Flanagan, he was actually over the ASU, so he was in charge of the main body of men that went to Pembroke Street, the worst place that was hit on Bloody Sunday. And GHQ, they talk about it. GHQ told them, right, basically, we'll tell you where to go and ambush, and so you wait around on the streets and watch the patrols and all. And like, one section nearly got arrested, and they just went, no way, here, no, we'll do our own thing. And they just basically said to GHQ, we see an opportunity, we're going to take it, and then if we need permission, we'll come back to you, but we're not going to wait. Because it was really, like, nearly, I think it was number 1 section was pretty much completely arrested. They got out by the skin of their teeth because they were waiting and watching a patrol and then going to GHQ for permission, and it was stupid. So that was knocked on the head pretty quickly. They tried, God love them, but it didn't work.
Yeah. Another question. Well done, thank you, from Tygo Brown. Did the anti-treaty IRA during the Civil War ever attempt to repeat income tax papers?
No, I've never heard that. But at that time, so 1922, they would have been only recreating the records. So, and people weren't too quick to be sending in now their returns. And myself and Michal, we've come across, they were actually offering people money to send in their income tax returns so they could recreate them. Because what you and again, it fits in us saying that the Custom House was always in their sights. Like, as long as Dick McKee was on the planet, the Custom House was going to be hit. He just had something in his head about it. And GHQ, when he went to GHQ that time, in April, that was his plan, to attack the Custom House. But they just said, look, let's attack the actual records first. So the originals are in the local income tax offices around the country. Just wait. And then they find out, they're told where the duplicates are. So it just made a lot handier for them to go and just destroy the duplicates. So everything was destroyed, as in the income tax records, by 1921 when they came in on the 25th of May. But there was a bit of difficulty in trying to get people to send in their records, despite the offer of money to do so. And with the Civil War, then there was so stuff relating to money, in that there was a number of banks, that were there were robberies and so on, to fund the anti-treaty IRA. But I haven't heard of anything where they were trying to attack any records like that, because they were pretty much gone, and trying to recreate them.
Okay, good. Thanks, Liz. Maura Riley says, brilliant, Liz. Love your enthusiasm as usual. You really bring us right back. Manus O'Riordan, Harbour, Liz, congratulations. Cecilia Hartnell, brilliant talk, Liz. Noel Fleming, Liz, you're a force of nature. Absolutely wonderful from start to finish. Thank you. Johnny Doyle makes a comment that there were barricades put up all around Downing Street after the Liverpool dock fires.
Wow.
Palsgrave, brilliant talk, Liz. Louisa Hancock, excellent as always, Liz. Your passion for history always shines through. Johnny Doyle, really great start to the run up to 25th of May. Well done, everyone. Jane Blankton, thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed tonight's lectures. Deirdre Colgan, could listen to you all day, Liz. Great insights and enjoyable talks from John Moore. Varney Crombie, hi, volunteer. Deirdre Colgan, makes sense. Brian O'Neill, the thing about Liz is that she has a totally natural presentation of her history because she lives it. That way she engages the audience and brings us into the story of our history, and that's so true. Patricia Wardell, do you know more about the IRA units in Athlone? I remember my mother and uncle talking about the Black and Tans raiding the at the islands in Loughree, and the boats coming back to Athlone with many injured men. In Athlone, the local barracks was a major British stronghold.
I don't personally, as in I would just, know from the sort of general sort of story, but I would say to you, I'm sure there's great local history books. I just can't think off the top of my head. And I know someone there, James Langton, probably will put up a book. But what I would do is go to the witness statements and just type in Athlone, because you will find accounts from volunteers. Now I know they're one-sided, but you will get information as to what was happening in Athlone and the surrounding area. And then the pension files, if you type in Athlone, God knows how many pensions you're going to get, but my God, they are the gift that keeps on giving, because you're not just getting the big names with the pensions, you're getting the ordinary rank and file, or the dependents of volunteers who died or were killed. They're absolutely amazing. So I checked there, and unfortunately the libraries aren't open, but if the libraries were open, or if you have a subscription, Irish newspapers online, the local newspapers are fantastic, because the richness of the stories that you get from them are amazing, and are telling the local side, the local story. They're fantastic, and it just proves that you cannot have the national story without telling the local story, and that's where the real history is at, and there's so much more to be discovered, but there probably is a book on Athlone, and I just can't think of it.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. We could check it out and maybe put up one or two.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd go back to this at the end of the series anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's see. Tommy Hegarty, when did Danbury die, and did he serve in the First Dáil?
Not in the First Dáil. He was a TD. He's the first to take one. I think he's one of the first to take a seat in the Dáil of anti-treaty. It was 1923 he went in, and it's a 69 that he dies. 69 or 70 when he dies. 1969 or 70 when he dies. Okay,
great. Mark O'Brien, first class talk as usual. Brilliant, Liz. Hope to see you soon for my podcast, In the Shadow of Croker, Walking Tours.
Hi, Sean.
Okay, Muriel McCauley says Danbury died December 1969, I think. So look, we've been on a long time, Liz.
Yeah.
We really need to leave it there, and to come back. We'll be back, of course, next week with some more. If you want to finish up, perhaps with that. But just for anybody who wants it, we do have a series of books which we publish. So just give you a quick flash at them here, and if we can get them up.
Yeah, they're up, Michal.
Yeah, you see that? Okay. So we got some 6 books there. There will be more coming over the year as well. And they're all available at commandandtales.ie or in a few shops around the city, Dublin City as well. You'll get them in Hannah's and Rapmines in particular have the full range. Right, Liz, back to you.
Okay, so everyone, again, just like to say a huge thank you to all of you for tuning in. This was our first night, this is our first attempt at live streaming, and our angel, our savior, Jerry McCarthy. We couldn't have done it without him, and thank you so much, Jerry. Thanks again just to the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage, Darragh O'Brien, to all the staff at the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, in particular Tim Carey, Sean Hogan and Jerry Shannon. And next week, so this is a series of talks. Next week, I'm delighted to announce that Sean Hogan, who has written an amazing book, a brilliant book. It is called The Black and Tans in North Tipperary. Sean's been a very good friend, a great supporter to us over the years with the conference. But Sean is going to talk about fire as a weapon. I touched on it. Sean's going to talk about fire as a weapon in the War of Independence. So the talk will be at 8 o'clock. I'll put up the link, and I will do it correctly this time. I will put it to the Facebook, the group's Facebook page. And everyone, we are going to have a YouTube channel up and running soon. So the videos will be uploaded to that hopefully in the next week or so, and then people who aren't on Facebook will be able to view them there as well. A huge thank you to Mihal, who's just been my partner in crime for 12 years with this. Again, Jerry, we just cannot thank you enough. Amazing. Tim, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful talk. And seriously, everyone, just thank you so much for tuning in and sticking with us tonight. And we hope to see you next week. But for now, stay safe. Not safe home. Stay